Introduction to Sumerian Paganism, or Sumerian Paganism 101 by Steffy von Scot. A little bit about me. I am the Presiding Officer of the Scottish Pagan Federation and the District Manager of the Scottish Pagan Federation, and I am also the coordinator of the annual Scottish Pagan Conference. I was the first pagan ever to be elected as chair of a regional interfaith organisation and the co-founder of Scota Goddess Temple. I am also the co-organiser of the Scottish Goddess Conference. For my pagan path, I am a Sumerian Reconstructionist, and I am one of the Ensis of Temple of Sumer, and the founder of Temple of Ananna. I am also the founder of the Council of Near Eastern Pagan Religions. I am associate member of the Order Templi Astartes and a member of the Temple of Ananna in Dumuzi. A little bit about my academic background, so that I actually know what I'm talking about. For the last half decade, I have been studying the ancient Near East in both the University of Glasgow and the University of Edinburgh. I have been studying the archaeology of the ancient Near East as well as the archaeology of ritual and magic, and have been studying also the magic of ancient Greece and Rome, and also looking at many of the Near Eastern cults out there, including the cult of Mithras and the cult of Anat, as well as the cult of the Queen of Heaven and Earth. What am I doing next? Well, I am currently co-organising the Scottish Goddess Conference, and I will be speaking there with the very talented Mariana Vital on the cult of Ananna. I am also working with the Scottish Government just now on consultations following on from the Pagan Discrimination Survey, and I will be speaking at an anti-discrimination against paganism event on the 18th of April. I'm also organising the first ever Scottish Pagan Pride, which will be announced soon. And for my faith tradition, I am working on several books and courses on Sumerian paganism, including Walking the Sumerian Path, which will hopefully be out soon, the Sumerian Calendar for modern practitioners. I'm working on a course on Sumerian magic in theory and practice, and I'm also working on an academic paper on the history of the contemporary Mesopotamian pagan community. So who were the Sumerians? Well, the Sumerians brought us into the Bronze Age. They were the first civilization. The word Sumer itself means the land of the civilized kings. They emerged in the southern part of an area that we call today the Fertile Crescent, which was the area where farming first began. It was the area the Greeks called Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers, and today we call this area modern Iraq. Now, their civilization emerged roughly 4200 BC during the Uruk expansion period. Although it's worth pointing out that their neighbouring city of Eridu dates to much earlier, during the Ubaidian period, and it was founded around 5600 BC. Although settlements in the area began much earlier than that, around 8000 BC. For context, the first pyramids in Egypt were built around 2630 BC, which was when the Sumerian civilization was almost extinct. So who were the Sumerians and what did they ever do for us? Well, they invented writing, which is pretty darn important. They invented the cuneiform script, which means wedge-shaped script, and they first used it as an accountancy system to record transactions, though it slowly evolved over time to record the written word. They were the first mathematicians. They had an advanced math system based on the sexagesimal system, which is based on factors of 60. They were the first to split circles into 360 degrees, and they used the Pythagoras theorem long before Pythagoras himself. They invented time. They were the first Time Lords, just like Doctor Who. Actually, that's a joke, But they did split time into 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, and they divided the year into 12 months. And their legacy is still felt today every time you look at your wristwatch. So what else did they do? Well, they invented the wheel. They invented the potter's wheel. They gave birth to the first gods. They invented beer, which is pretty darn important too. They invented the sailboat. They invented the plough. They invented the water clock. They invented the first underground sewage systems. They invented makeup and they invented glass jewellery. However, up until the mid 19th century, we had no idea of any of this. Up until the mid 19th century, most modern academics attributed the birth of our Western civilization to the Greeks. Writing was thought to have originated in Phoenicia, time-telling to China, and schools of philosophy and the arts to Greece. Much of the area that was once Sumer had been lost to time due to climate change and the receding water levels from the Persian Gulf, which you can see from the picture to your bottom right. Huge Sumerian port cities like Eridu, Uruk, and Ur, once thriving centres of trade and commerce, were now in the centre of a desert wasteland. Sumer was only discovered by accident while looking for proof of the Bible and searching from the ancient city of Babylon, the location of the infamous Babylonian captivity. Rather than proving the Bible, the discovery of Sumer had much the opposite effect. Many famous biblical myths, such as the Great Flood and the Garden of Eden, were found to be based on much earlier pagan myths by the Sumerians. So what makes the Sumerians the first civilization? Well, we often say that history begins at Sumer, but perhaps we should be saying civilization begins at Sumer, for without one we cannot have the other. We often hear pseudo-archaeology websites claiming that they have found a much older civilization that will rewrite the history books in the disinformation age. Ancient Origins website, as an example, states that the Danube Valley civilization dates to 5000 to 3500 BC, and its script was 1000 years older than the Sumerians. However, a cursory search of academia dates the script to around 2700 BC. Much of this ideology is driven by toxic nationalism and racism in trying to prove that white-skinned Europeans came before much darker-skinned Near Eastern civilizations. So what makes them the first civilization? Well, in academia, a civilization is an advanced society that is identified by 7 complex developments in arts, sciences, government, and social structure. And academia sets the following markers as agriculture, an advanced social structure, government, religion and theology, the arts, technology, and most importantly, a complex writing system able for that civilization to record its own history. Though it's worth pointing out that if we did wish to date civilization to the pictographic writing system, we do have pictographic communications dating well back into the Neolithic period in Mesopotamia around 8000 BC. The early Mesopotamians used a pictographic token system which predates their use in cuneiform writing. These early pictographs developed into the first writing system in Uruk during the Uruk expansion period. Now, the Uruk expansion made it the largest urban area in the world at the time, with 40,000 people in the city and 90,000 people in its environs. Due to the size, complexity and scale of the Uruk expansion, a way to capture trade, connections and commerce became crucial. And over time, the system changed to become more abstract in its symbology. It is with the development of a complex writing system that a civilization can be categorized. So what records do the Sumerians keep? Well, we have between 2 million and 500,000 cuneiform tablets discovered so far. Many more of these are still to be discovered as they lie under the desert. War in Iraq is making finding these incredibly difficult. Many ancient Sumerian and Akkadian cities also are still to be located and rediscovered. though we know of their existence through the cuneiform texts that we have already translated. Today, only approximately 30,000 to 100,000 of these have been read and published, which is really only 5% of what we have. These records survive because they were written in clay. While many ancient libraries have burned, such as the Library of Alexandria, which lost a wealth of literature, fire only makes clay tablets stronger. The vast majority of tablets contain contracts, inventory lists, bills of sale, and they give an insight into the daily life of Mesopotamia throughout the ages. We have also recovered a great many complex myths and epics. To date, we have more myths and prayers to pagan gods than every other pagan path combined, more magical texts and rituals than any other pagan path, and we have several fully constructible calendar systems to use. While other pagan paths have no myths, or myths written down much later by Christian monks, we have myths that come direct from the source. So who were the Sumerians not? Well, the Sumerians were not space aliens. The idea itself that the Sumerians were somehow this advanced space alien race, or that they were somehow taught by space aliens, is based on racist ideologies that purport that people from darker skinned foreign countries and ancient civilizations couldn't possibly have invented something as complex as making bricks with mud, and they must have had help from space aliens. While at the same time, the people purporting these ideas have no problems in believing that people from white-skinned European countries could invent things like electricity, the telephone, the steam engine, cinema, advanced robotics, the television, the internet, the automobile, the atom bomb, and many other fantastic inventions. Those pesky aliens with their advanced technologies, such as shaping mud into brick-like forms. So what led to the Sumerians? Well, there is a myth that's went down through the ages of academia that the Sumerians were these magical people who emerged from the sea to bring civilization to mankind. But this has been pretty much debunked by the current academia. And to understand how the Sumerians emerged, we need to look at the area of the Near East and how it evolved over time. And to do that, we start at the Ice Age. Now, the Ice Age began 55 million years ago. The human race appears roughly 200,000 to possibly 300,000 years ago, which is what current academia are pointing towards. But however, we spent the next 190,000 years primarily as hunter-gatherers, moving around in semi-nomadic tribes. Now, this is an important point to remember and consider. Hunter-gatherer bands are normally 50 to 60 strong. This enables a mobile way of life, and it conserves food supplies among the tribe, and it ensures every member of the tribe is provided for. Now, around 13,000 BC, temperatures began to rise, and this lasts several hundred years before they fall again to glacial levels. Then, around 10,000 BC, temperatures begin rising again, and this time they do not stop, and the Fertile Crescent is the first to feel this impact. Now, let's look to the early Natufian period of the Near East, which is 12,800 BC to 11,250 BC. These rising temperatures brought about a climate crisis for the hunter-gatherer tribes in this region. Their primary food supply, the woolly mammoth, is dying out in the area. Many of them flee, following the mammoths west towards Central Europe. Those who remain behind will have to adapt to survive. The warmer, wetter climate brings about a profound change to the natural environment. The melting ice exposes newly formed oases along the base of the Taurus Mountains. At this time period, most of Europe is still under several meters of sheet ice. This takes us into the late Natufian period, 11,250 BC to 10,200 BC. Here we see these newly exposed oases begin to attract a steady supply of animals to bathe and feed at, and allowed plants and herbs to flourish. This in turn provided a steady food source for the existing hunter-gatherer tribes in the area. It is in these areas that the human race will first begin to settle. This change starts with the Natufian culture. These were the first hunter-gatherers who started exploiting the natural growing wild crops such as wheat and barley in these areas, and gradually over time they settled close to these favourable areas. This change enables the first semi-settled communities to form, which begins the process that would lead to the first permanent human settlements around these very same areas. These people became the first farmers, and we call this period Metholithic with agriculture. This brings us to a temple that pretty much everyone should know about, Gobekli Tepe. It dates to 9600 BC to 8200 BC in this region. It was the first proto-temple, and again it's found along the banks of the Euphrates River. It was during this transitional period that mankind put its first permanent marker on what we call the built environment, and that was Gobekli Tepe. It was built as a final stand by hunter-gatherer tribes in the area, all coming together as their way of life is slowly dying out, and with many tribes now beginning to settle. Their way of life was disappearing, and this site was built as a monument to what had came before and a memory of what they had left behind, and it was buried shortly after completion. Now, the site itself contains many examples of what we call totemic artwork, possibly representing each tribe and also reflecting the animistic belief system and shamanic religion of the people living there at the time. The human race still saw themselves as part of the animal kingdom at this period, not outside it. This is where we also see the first radial pillar building, which is a blueprint for what would come after, and the first example of monumental architecture, which is spread towards Europe over the next few thousand years. It is probably no coincidence that the wild wheat found around Gobekli Tepe is the same genetic ancestor of every type of wheat found around the world today. And it is with this monument that we see the first permanent human settlements begin. This takes us on nicely to the pre-Pottery Neolithic A period, which is between 9800 BC to 8800 BC. At this time period, the human population on Earth stands at around 4 million people. The first permanent human settlements begin to emerge. These range from small villages to larger towns. And at this period, the process of Neolithization has begun. The Neolithic Revolution was the transition of many human cultures during the Neolithic period from a lifestyle of primarily hunter-gatherers to one of agriculture and settlement. And again, this made increasingly larger populations possible. A series of villages begin to emerge, both along the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and they follow the rivers both up and down from the site where Gobekli Tepe was erected and then covered over. Settled populations during this period grow from 40 to 60 people, which were the hunter-gatherer tribe sizes, to around 200 to 500 people. Burial practices begin around this time period, and these involve the dead being placed under the floors of the house, with the house dwellers living with the dead. This is the first signs that the cult of the dead is taking shape. This brings us into the pre-Pottery Neolithic B, which is between 8800 BC to 6500 BC, and I would say this is the most important period that we should focus on. At this period, we see villages increase in size and density from 500 people that we had during the PPNA to up to 1,400 people in the middle PPNB, and then up to 4,000 people by the late PPNB. It is with this population increase that we see a shift in the societal structure, with regards to the concept of the family. Now, again, it's worth remembering that hunter-gatherer tribes had between 50 to 60 people to keep numbers low and ensure the survival of the tribe. Now, when mankind begins to settle, we are now living alongside extended families and sharing a home with parents and grandparents and with children and grandchildren. And new concepts of kinship slowly changes to be more focused on the extended family. It is with this societal change that the cult of the ancestors emerges. Very few burials existed within hunter-gatherer tribes, and we find that most bodies were left to nature or to be eaten by animals. Now, families go from burying family members under their homes to manipulating and plastering over skulls and bones, having skulls and bones in temples, having skulls and bones in specific places in the houses. And according to the neuroscientist Robin Dunbar, this is a sign that human cognition is expanding to suit new interconnections between peoples. Again, society is growing from 40 people to 4,000 people in one area, so our minds needed to expand to better process all these new connections. At this period, we see an explosion of symbolic and ritual artwork, the likes of which we have never seen before. This leads us into the Sunnah Samara or early Ubaidian period, 6500 BC to 5300 BC. Skull cults continue in the region. Evidence of ancestral veneration is spreading across Near Eastern society. The cult of the ancestors is a forerunner to religion. The collective consciousness of society continues to expand within these communities. Hive mind sharing innovation as the human frontal cortex expands to suit these new cultural connections as societal numbers grow exponentially. This process will lead to an explosion of inventions that we witness with the Sumerians. The pottery Neolithic and ceramic period has now begun. Across in northern Mesopotamia, we see a precursor to the goddess with the power over beasts, as she is found to be venerated there. As the Sunnah Samara or early Ubaidian period slowly draws to an end, the Ubaidian period begins proper. Gods will emerge from the cult of the ancestors, with the victory of humanity over their environment finally upon us. The first temple to a god is built in the city of Eridu, around 5300 BC. That god was the Sumerian god Enki. There is a myth that the Sumerians were these mythical people who emerged from the sea to bring civilization to mankind. But in reality, they were just part of a 4,000-year-old model of human progress. Again, who were the Sumerians not? The Sumerians were not reptilian space aliens! These figurines to your right hand side are often found on ancient alien websites and used as proof that the Sumerians were these reptilian space aliens or were taught by reptilian space aliens. But in reality, many of these figurines were found in graves, and they were found in graves of high-ranking officials. Note the shells in the eyes of the figurines. These were a common theme from how the dead were buried, with shells in their eyes. The shells used were concho shells. Also note the pose. They were the way the dead was found to be buried in many of these sites, laid flat with their arms crossed across their body on a reed mat. Many of the dead found during this time period had elongated skulls, just like the figurines that were buried with them. These skull elongations are thought to be part of a cultural tradition of skull binding done at birth, which would lead to the skull growing elongated, and many of the dead have been found like this. Many of these figurines were also painted red with ceramic powder that were used to paint the bodies of the shaman or the teacher or the leader or the individual that they shared a tomb with. These seem to be associated with the cult of the dead and the ancestors that continued on into the early Ubaidian period. Again, there's always a rational explanation for these things, But it's sad that many of these images are shared out of context with no background as to where they were found or what was found alongside them or who they shared a grave with. This brings us nicely to Sumerian paganism in practice. Now, Sumerian paganism is a modern religious and spiritual movement aimed at reconstructing the religious practices of the ancient Near East, Sumerian, Babylonian, and Akkadian. While being the oldest recorded pagan religion, it is sometimes seen as the most forward-thinking, given both ancient and modern Sumerians embraced technology and innovation, as we have just discussed. While many other pagan paths tend to shy away from technology, we actively embrace it, just as we imagine our Sumerian forebears would have done if they were here with us today. The Sumerian religion is very positively focused, with community empowerment, hospitality, civilization building, creativity, and innovation at its very heart. It can be described as a civilization-based pagan faith tradition, rather than a nature-based pagan faith tradition, though we find many other pagan paths are civilization-based faith traditions, such as the Roman pagan path, or even the Egyptian pagan path, or Kemetic. The Sumerian religion. They say there are over 40,000 gods in the Sumerian religion, and this may seem like an overwhelming concept to grasp. Actually, at the beginning of the Sumerian religion, there was only around 1,000 gods, and this number of gods grew as civilization did. One way to look at it can be as an extended family of gods, all working together for the betterment of society. The Sumerians saw civilization as a gift from the gods. The gods of Sumer were gods of civilization and order. They brought civilizations to society and order to the universe. Our gods divert the power of chaos by their very existence. They don't fight chaos, they civilize it. They don't destroy nature, they tend to nature and they manage it. Our gods are the gardeners and we, humanity, are their garden. At the head of the pantheon of the gods was a council of gods that we call the Anunna or Anunnaki. The Anunna were made up of 7 great gods who decreed the fates of mankind. So who were the 7 great gods who decreed the fate of man and brought order to the universe? Well, they were An, or Anu, the father of the gods, Enlil, lord of the wind, the head of the pantheon, god of the heavens and the storms, Enki, or Ya, lord of the earth, the god of magic, wisdom, fresh water, invention, god of rivers and god of exorcism, Inanna, or Ishtar, who was the queen of heaven. She was the goddess of love, passion and warfare, the living embodiment of the planet Venus, goddess of kingship and dominion. Ninkursag, goddess of the foothills, the mother goddess, the goddess of mothers and motherhood. Nana, or Sian, the moon god, lord of time. And finally, last but by no means least, Utu, or Shamash, the sun god and the god of justice. Now, we don't have time to discuss all of the Sumerian gods, or even a number of them, so we're going to focus on 2. And the 2 main ones we're going to focus on today are Enki and Inanna. Now, Enki is the first, and Enki is sometimes described as the pagan god of the Bible. And there's a reason for that. The Sumerian city of Ur was the birthplace of the Bible's Abraham, who is, again, as many people know, the father of the Abrahamic faith traditions. In Sumer, Enki was the great magician of the gods, god of wisdom and healing. His temple in Eridu is the earliest temple to any pagan deity. His name was Ea in Akkadian, which is pronounced Ya. His rituals involved holy water and his symbol was a fish. He was the god who warned the Sumerian Noah, or Atrahasis, or Ziasudra, or Utnapishtim, depending on which version of the myth you read, of the oncoming flood. in the earliest flood stories that predate the Bible by around 3,000 years. He was the god who created mankind from clay, along with the mother goddess Nimwa, in the Sumerian creation story. And he was the god who gave birth to the daughter of the rib in the Sumerian Eden story, alongside the mother goddess Ninkursag. He was the god also who confused the languages of man in the Sumerian version of the Babel story. And again, he was the father of the first dying and resurrected god Tammuz or Dumuzi. He was also the father of the first monotheistic god Marduk, who had absorbed all the other gods in the pantheon during his reign in Babylon. Marduk was also the god of Cyrus, who was again the Jewish Messiah who saved the Jewish people during the Babylonian captivity. And Enki or Yah was also equated with the Greek titan Kronos, father of the gods, who is also linked to Yahweh in the comparative god lists. Next we will come on to Ananna or Ishtar. Now, Ananna or Ishtar was the most popular goddess in the ancient Near East during all time periods, and she influenced a great many goddesses who came after her. Not many pagans realise this, but she's also the longest continually worshipped goddess of all time. Her temple, the Eanna, in Uruk, dated back to 4200 BC, and in literature she arrives fully formed, indicating that she is far older than that. Now, the earliest written texts in the early dynastic god lists place her near the head of the pantheon. While other goddesses lose status over time, she continues to rise right up to the head of the pantheon during the Babylonian era, where she's the primary goddess of all of Mesopotamia, and she stays there. Her popularity was so enduring that she's still worshipped in Mardin, Turkey, well into the 18th century. Her worship died out only when the Assyrian massacres and genocides were carried out by the Ottoman state in 1895 to 1896, and then again in 1909, and then later in 1914 to 1924. And out of the 1 million Assyrians worldwide at the time, this left 850,000 dead and 250,000 displaced. And after this period, no records of her cult are recorded. That's still over 6,000 years of continued worship for one goddess. Again, 3 times longer than the Near Eastern god Yeshua or Jesus, which is quite an achievement. Now, Ananna or Ishtar is often described as a union of opposites, and to best reflect this, I'm going to read 2 of her hymns. The first one is entitled To the Goddess Sing. To the goddess sing, most awesome of goddesses, mistress of the people, greatest of the goddesses, praise be she. She of joy, dressed in grace, adorned with brightness, polish and appeal. Ishtar of joy, dressed in grace, adorned with brightness, polish and appeal. Her lips are sweet, her mouth is life itself, on her features laughter blooms. Now the next hymn I'm going to say is again another hymn to the goddess, and it's slightly different from the previous one. I'll read it and you'll understand why. That you totally destroy rebellious lands, be it known. That you roar at all the lands, be it known. That you kill, be it known. That like a dog you eat the corpses, be it known. That your glance is terrible, be it known. That you lift this terrible glance, be it known. That your glance flashes, be it known. At those who do not obey you, be it known. And that you attain great victories, be it known. Now, I think this reflects the union of opposites that Ananna is described as. In one instance, she is described as a destructress and the destroyer of all who oppose her. In another, she is described as a healer and greatly loved and a mistress of all the people, and one who brings joy and abundance to all who follow her. And this is also reflected in her mythology. In mythology, Ananna is a very ambitious and powerful goddess. Most people know the descent of Ananna, where the goddess sets off to steal the powers of the netherworld from her sister Ereshkigal, but many people don't realise it's just one part of her plan to rule over all dominions, heaven, earth, and the netherworld. In an earlier myth, she steals the house of heavens from the father of the gods, An or Anu. In another, she steals the maze of civilization, which give her the divine powers of all the functions of earth from the god of magic Enki, after getting him very drunk. So, when she sets off towards the netherworld, she already has in her possession the powers over heaven and earth, and she sets her mind to conquering the great below. For those who don't know the myth, her plans and ambitions go terribly wrong, and she's struck dead for her crime and hung on a hook. But she has plans in place to ensure she is resurrected. In Mesopotamia, Ananna has more temples than any other deity. Ananna had 184 temples dedicated to her alone in Mesopotamia. To put that in perspective, the mother goddess Ninkursag only had 21 temples in 3 cities, while Ereshkigal only had 3 temples, and 2 of them came much later during the Assyrian period. Inanna Areshtar is a goddess of female empowerment and women's rights. More popular than the mother goddess nearly all time periods, and she is a goddess who stood for a strong, independent female who was second to no man, and she bested male deities at every turn. She is also a goddess of LGBTQ plus people and gender non-conformity, which many people don't realise. And her temple welcomed people of all sexualities and genders and gender identities. She had transgender and gender diverse priesthoods, and her most famous ritual is the head overturning rite, which was the ritual that changed men into women and women into men. Now it's worth pointing out that when her myths and prayers were first rediscovered and translated in the 1940s and even up into the late 1990s, they were seen as too controversial by many academics to actually translate them accurately. Terms like vagina and vulva were replaced by terms deemed less offensive by the academics in question, who seemed very uncomfortable with the subject matter. Steffy preferred to substitute the word nakedness in place of both vulva and vagina in the translations of Ananna's myths, while Jacobson called them her private parts. Perhaps this is a symptom of both academics' inability to see women as sexual creatures, or perhaps this is just pure old-fashioned Puritanism. Whatever the reason, this censorship changes the meaning of the text. For example, Steffati's translation of "For my nakedness let us rejoice" has very different connotations to the actual true translation of the text, which was "For my vulva let us rejoice." The former implies a celebration of the female form, where the latter is a more evocative of a goddess being confident in embracing her sexuality and her desire to actually enjoy sex. Many academics who are unfamiliar with Sumerian culture may have assumed that these were direct translations and misunderstood the confidence of the Sumerian people in discussing sexuality and sex. This may also be reflective of our own society. It's worth remembering that in 2012, 2 United States female politicians were banned from the Michigan House of Representatives after one of them used the word vagina. Also, a modern survey has revealed that two-thirds of young women today had admitted they were too embarrassed to say the word vagina to their doctor, and many charities said that this possibly would lead to increased risks of ovarian cancer among the young. Again, there's a stark contrast between a culture that refers to genitals by name, the Sumerians, and a culture like ours who feels the need to use a euphemism or are pretty much too embarrassed to mention them at all. And again, academics point out that the greatest obstacle in seeing Inanna as a goddess of sexuality over a goddess of love is this constant embarrassment by academics and scholars who seem wary of discussing sexual intercourse, and especially discussing the idea of a woman holding a prominent role in sex without losing her virtue. While acknowledging the Sumerians were earthly people, it is very sad that many scholars today avoid the issue of Ananna's relationship with sexual activity and actually its enjoyment. Now, since we're on the subject of Ananna or Ishtar, it's worth touching on the Burnley relief and a little bit about the history of the plaque. The Burnley relief, also known as the Queen of the Night plaque, sits in the British Museum, and the identity of the goddess in the plaque is often majorly disputed, not just in academia, but in pagan circles. Is it Ishtar? Is it Lilith? Is it Ereshkigal? Is it the goddess Ninlil? The plaque itself dates to the Ising-Larsen period. Before that time period, humanoid depictions of deity were considered taboo out with the temple, but during the Ising-Larsen period that all changed. Soon, depictions of deity were mass-produced and were all over Mesopotamia and brought into people's homes. Now, the plaque itself was first identified to be the demoness Lilith by Samuel Noah Kramer in 1931, and this is based purely on the plaque having owls. And this has led to a lot of confusion among pagans today. However, Lilith was successfully argued against by Jacobson in 1987, who put forward Ishtar as the best candidate based on the iconography. Dr. Black put forward the possibility of Ereshkigal later, and up until fairly recently, academia has been torn between Ishtar and Ereshkigal as the best candidates for the goddess in question. The latest academic paper on the subject, which was released in 2014, argues strongly for Ishtar, and actually quite successfully, and she is currently the lead contender for the deity in the plaque. So let's have a look at the plaque and have a little bit of analysis into it. As you can see from the depiction on the left-hand side, these are the actual colours of the plaque when it was originally produced. Now, if we look to the top of the head of the goddess in question, there is a horned crown, which represents divinity. Now, as during the time period Lilith was not considered a goddess but a demoness, the horned crown would not apply. Therefore, this rules out Lilith as a possibility. Next, we look to the symbols in the hands of the goddess in question, which are the rod and the ring symbols, which again are the divine powers that decree fates of mankind. Again, there are 7 great gods who decree fates of mankind, and Ereshkigal and Lilith were not on the 7 who decree fates list, but Ishtar was. Next, we look to the necklace and the bangles around the neck, which could be 2 of Ananna's or Ishtar's divine powers that she was wearing when she began the descent in the descent myth. Next, we look at the patterns on the wings and the colour scheme in the wings, which again are similar to depictions of the goddess Ananna or Ishtar on the walls of the palace reliefs at Mari. Then we look at the colour of the goddess, red. Ishtar is described as red in mythology. In fact, her priestess is dressed in red, whereas Ereshkigal is always described as pale. Next, we look at the symbols of lions which the goddess is standing upon. Now, lions are Ishtar's sacred animal, as they are representative of divine kingship. Then we look to the owls to either side of the goddess. Now, owls are actually described as Ishtar's established envoy in her hymns. And then we look to the facial features. And again, if you look to the right-hand side, you will see a picture of the Worka mask, which is the same facial features as the goddess in the plaque. Now, the Worka mask was found in the Inanna, Ishtar's temple in Uruk. Next, we looked at the earrings and the shape of the earrings, which are actually like Inanna's or Ishtar's ring post symbol, which you see to the bottom right. At the bottom of the plaque, we see the hilly region, which again is representative of the netherworld, and we know that the goddess descended to the netherworld and died there. And then we see the colour scheme of the plaque, which is the same colour scheme that was in the temple of Ananna in Uruk, the Anna. And finally, we looked at the claw feet, which are representative of death. So we could say, is this Ishtar or Ananna's death and resurrection scene from the Descent of Ananna myth? It may be. And it would be wrong to talk about Ananna or Ishtar without mentioning Enheduanna, the High Priestess of the Moon. Now, Enheduanna was the world's first author known by name. She's even made it to the top 5 list of the most influential women in the world. Enheduanna began life as the daughter of the world's first emperor, Sargon of Akkad. She became the end priestess of the city of Ur around 2300 BC in a move by her father to better strengthen his kingdom. And she was responsible for merging the Sumerian Ananna with the Akkadian Ishtar, who was her father's patron goddess. In life, she was ritually married to the moon god Nanna and became the living embodiment of his wife, the goddess Ningal. She was given the title Enheduanna at that point, meaning ornament of heaven, which is one of the titles of the goddess Inanna. As end priestess, she had the power to make or break kings, and she was more powerful than any pope. During her endship, her city was sacked by a power-hungry warlord named Lugal-Ani, who seized the opportunity to stage a coup, and he demanded that she make him king. But she refused, which is just wonderful and reflective of actually her divine powers. But for that, she was exiled from the city. So her story goes that she travels from temple to temple, praying and making offerings to the goddess Inanna, and begging her to restore her to power. And her prayers were finally answered by her nephew Naram Sin, who quelled the uprising and who restored her to her prominent place in the city. And all this is told in her most famous temple hymn, Ninmeshara. It's also worth touching on Mesopotamian magic and theory and practice. Now, as many people know, the origins of magic lie in the ancient Near East. The Greek term magia is a direct loan word from the Old Persian magus. The term was used to describe the religious practices of the Near East, though it wasn't meant as a compliment, but more as a derogatory term. At that time, magic, science, and religion were all parts of the same belief system. In Mesopotamia, the expert in magic is called, in Sumerian, the Mashmashu, or Akkadian, the Shiptu. This term translates as exorcist, and the body of incantations itself was referred to as the Shiptu, exorcistic lore, or simply magic. Now, the Babylonian tradition considers this corpus of texts to be of great antiquity and authored by the great god of magic himself, Enki or Ea, god of wisdom and exorcism. Now, Mesopotamian magic can be subdivided into 4 major categories. Liminal magic, which is white magic by which the ritual client or ritual object is transformed and taken another status, and this is considered white magic. Defensive magic, by which evil that has beset or threatens to beset someone is removed or repelled, and also this is considered to be white magic. Aggressive magic, by which the ritual client gains superiority, strength, and attractiveness, and this is a grey area that comes somewhere between white and black magic. It really depends on the intention. And finally, black magic, which is an illegal, aggressive form of magic by which the ritual client has been harmed. So there are many different types of Mesopotamian magic that have come down to us through the clay tablets. These include purification rituals, rituals of water consecration, Building a protective circle or a ritual space, Mesopotamian healing or protective magic, magic against illness, headaches, or fever sickness, Mesopotamian magic for life, love, and relationships, Mesopotamian magic for pregnancy, childbirth, and infancy, magic against ghosts, death, and Mesopotamian vampires, protection magic against curses, protection magic against anger of a personal god, magic against omens, magic against black magic, and a series of protective magic against all sorts of demons, which include the Udok-Hul texts, the Lilitu Pazuzu texts, Lamashtu Pazuzu texts, the Rabasu texts, and there's also Mesopotamian magic for competitions such as business, enemies, and legal conflicts, and also the creation of a divine statue. There's also magic against sin, which is a Supru, which is again the Mesopotamian concepts of sin is offending your gods. And there's also Mesopotamian magic for bodily functions, such as against farting and flatulence. And I've got a little example of a spell against farting and flatulence here. And I'm going to recite some of it, if you don't mind. Wind, O wind, wind, you are the fire of the gods. You are the wind between Turd and Urine. You have come out and taken your place among the gods, your brethren. What would Pazuzu do? Actually, I comically called this slide "What would Pazuzu do?" because I gave a talk around half a decade ago on Mesopotamian wind demons, which included Pazuzu and Lamashtu and Lilith demons. And I thought it would be funny to have a T-shirt printed up that said "What would Pazuzu do?" and I had a picture of Pazuzu on the T-shirt for the talk itself. So who was Pazuzu? Well, Pazuzu was the king of the wind demons. And again, Pazuzu shot to fame in modern times as the demon in The Exorcist. And many people will probably recognize him from that movie. Now, in Mesopotamia, Pazuzu was actually a hugely protective deity in the first millennium BC. In ancient times, he was evoked by women and mothers who wished to protect their children. And again, he's used in Mesopotamian magic to fight against Lilith demons and Lamashtu. And talismans of Pazuzu would be worn around the necks of pregnant women and little babies. So Hollywood did him a great disservice in casting him as a demon who would possess a young girl, when in fact he would have done quite the opposite, and he would have protected her. And I would like to close off this talk with a little introduction to how modern Mesopotamian paganism sits alongside the other pagan faith traditions. So, as I discussed earlier, around 1895 to 1896, Ishtar's cult in Turkey came to an end with the Syrian Holocaust by the Ottoman state. And then, only 25 years later, Margaret Murray publishes Witch Cults in Western Europe, a book we all probably know about. 20 years on from that, 1942, a partial copy of Ananna's Descent to the Netherworld is published by Samuel Noah Kramer. A few years on from that, the book Sumerian Mythology is published by Samuel Noah Kramer. And in 1946, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard performed their legendary Babylon working. 1950, a copy of Ananna's Descent into the Netherworld is published by Samuel Noah Kramer. This is the first complete copy ever to be published. And then 1954, Gerald Gardner publishes Witchcraft Today, and at that point becomes the father of modern witchcraft. And then 15 years on from that, 1969, Valerie Voigt becomes the priestess of Ishtar. Same year, Carol Polk Runyon founds Ordo Templi Astartes, or the Church of Hermetic Sciences. And again in 1980, Valerie becomes an ordained priestess of Isis and Ishtar by the Fellowship of Isis. And she launches the Fellowship of Isis Centre for Divine Ishtar at that period. 1995, 15 years on from that, Dan Adapa Sullivan launches Twin Rivers Rising website, which is an extension of his coven, the Coven of Twin Rivers Rising, And he begins collaborating with a woman we know today as Lishtar, Dr. Rosanne Lopez. She is very important in the Mesopotamian pagan community and a great inspiration to many people. And then in 1998, Ross Caldwell launches Babylonian Magic website. At the same year, Lishtar launches her Gates to Babylon website, and then come forward to 2006 when Temple of Sumer website goes live as a resource for modern Sumerian pagan practitioners. And again, the Sumerian uh, pagan Temple of Sumer discussion board launches shortly after this period. And I think I'll finish with a few Sumerian pagan resources. Websites that may interest you: Temple of Sumer website in Eridu if you're interested in magic, Mesopotamian or Babylonian magic. Gates or Gateways to Babylon website, which is Lishtar's famous website. Four Reads, which is a new Mesopotamian pagan publishing house. Facebook communities you may be interested in: Temple of Sumer page and Facebook group. Temple of Ananna Facebook group, which is where I pretty much post every day, and Order of the Rod and Ring Facebook group, which again you should all check out, and a few book recommendations. And again, if you're interested in more book recommendations, please join Temple of Ananna or Temple of Sumer, and I can give you a complete list. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Merlin and Children of Artemis for inviting me along to speak on this subject. Be well and take care of yourself. Thank you.